The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata being the Buddha, the awakened one, and each of us possesses the same mind. We are the same mind, really. Today is the second day of this session here in February 2020 at Mountain Gate. It was originally planned to be and scheduled to be a 7-day session, but circumstances intervened, and it will be cut short at 4 days. Things change. This is the one permanent aspect of existence, is that things change. Nothing else stays the same. A tulku in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is a person who is a reborn, they call it lineage holder. In other words, it's, if you were to compare this to a Zen master, in Zen, it would be a Zen master who holds a lineage in Zen practice through deep training. In the Tibetan tradition, of course, there's a lot of credence given to rebirth, which is not exactly the same as reincarnation. And it's classic for Tibetan high Buddhist officials to go searching for the rebirth of a famous, highly regarded, highly trained Buddhist master in their lineage. And that person, once they discover that person, they are known as a tulku. In this case, I'd like to share a little bit of the teaching of Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, who is a tulku, in the Dzogchen, one of the Dzogchen lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. Dzogchen is quite akin to Zen. It's a meditative practice, and it has many parallels. This is from a book called In Love with the World, A Monk's Journey Through the Bardos of Living and Dying by Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, with Helen Tworkov, who is also a longtime Buddhist practitioner in the Tibetan tradition. Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche was discovered, I don't know exactly when, how early. The Dalai Lama, I believe, was discovered when he was between 2 and 3 years old. Mingyur Rinpoche's parents, his father was also a tulku, and his father was his first teacher, sounds like. And there's a lovely piece at the very beginning of this book in which he says, "Are you Mingyur Rinpoche? My father asked me this question soon after I began studying with him when I was around 9 years old. It was so gratifying to know the correct answer that I proudly declared, 'Yes, I am.' And then he asked, 'Can you show me the one thing in particular that makes you Mingyur Rinpoche?' I looked down the front of my body to my feet. I looked at my hands. I thought about my name. I thought about who I was in relation to my parents and my older brothers. I couldn't come up with an answer. He then made looking for the real me sound like a treasure hunt, and I earnestly searched under rocks and behind trees. When I was 11 years old, I began my studies at Shirabling, a monastery in northern India, where I brought this search inside myself through meditation." How wonderful that his father turned it into almost like a game. But this is the fundamental question of all of humanity, if they bothered to consider it for a moment. We are always trying to get out of suffering. And when we have moments of happiness, moments of peace, we're not motivated as much to practice. Yet, when we find ourselves in anguish, in pain, in suffering, at the end of our string, then is a very fertile ground for practice. It is the nature of our human mind that we seek after pleasure and try to avoid pain. And so, even if we've been down and out, when we begin to rise up again, any interest in searching for something beyond the moment is usually relegated to the back shelf. When I was in 1973 running a business of my own, doing commercial interior design, and my husband, who was a diplomat, was suddenly assigned to the embassy in Ankara, Turkey, as the special assistant to the new ambassador. And within 3 weeks, he was gone to his new post. But with my company, I couldn't just shut it up like that. I had to complete some projects and turn it over so that it could continue on in a helpful and an appropriate way. And so the kids and I stayed the summer, and I continued to do my work. At the time, TM was a big deal, and I was kind of interested in learning about TM, or learning TM. I had a friend who also was quite interested and actually went and paid the money and took the flower and got the training. I don't know whatever happened to her after that, because we were not in a position to continue communicating, as I was living overseas finally again. And when I finally arrived in Ankara with the kids, my husband and I were invited to the ambassador's house for a welcoming party for all the new Americans who had arrived. And among them was a man who had been he'd been a mathematician at the University of Michigan, PhD mathematician. He taught mathematics, higher mathematics at the University of Michigan. And he had originally been Turkish, but was an American citizen way long before that. And he told me, learned how to do Zen meditation and also learned how to do TM. And I said, great, show me how to do TM. And his response was, well, I can't do that because you've got to go to New York City and get a mantra. But I can teach you how to do Zen meditation. And I said, no thanks. That was before my life crashed. And it was to happen 3 months later, where everything I held dear, everything I identified with, suddenly was ripped out of my hands. This is known in some circles as a shamanic initiation. And I asked a friend of mine about this many, many years later on a totally different, unrelated occasion. I was told a shamanic initiation means everything old ripped away. And in that case, it certainly was. And it was extremely painful. The mathematician happened to be a member of the Rochester Zen Center, and he happened also to have a copy of The Wheel of Death, which was Mitra-roshi's second book, very small, thin tome, 4 chapters, death, dying, karma, and rebirth. He loaned it to me, and I read it straight through. In it were the stories of many eminent people, monks, masters, and also some historic classical folks like Socrates. And in what was shared in that book were the stories of their dying. For me, with nothing left, nothing, absolutely nothing left, all I wanted to do was die. And I thought, well, if I can't do it, at least I can read about it. And so I did, cover to cover, and came out the other end at midnight, wondering what these people had known that I didn't, that they were able to die so peacefully, so easily, so without regret. And so the next morning I asked the mathematician if he would teach me how to do Zazen. And I sat down and crossed my legs for the first time in January 1st, 1974. It was a very challenging time for a long time after that. And I offer that to tell people that it's worth it. No matter what you have to go through to practice, it's worth it. It's challenging to practice. You open to everything you've tried to avoid and hide from in your life. But that is for actual great benefit, because only then can you process it and allow it to release. But more than that, far more than that, to do deep practice with a teacher, to do deep Zazen, has the potential for an amazing level of liberation. This is what we're told. This is also what we can experience. The biggest challenge, perhaps, to Zen practice is the fact that when we begin doing Zen practice, often out of some level of pain, things begin to get a little easier. And we're so tempted to slough off. Suddenly the motivation is much reduced. Many of you have heard this story before, but I'll share it again because it's an important one. Shortly before I ended up in Turkey, I had received a new catalog for my business, and I was looking through it to familiarize myself with what was available in the catalog. And I came upon some absolutely beautiful chairs, quite modern, red, which is my favorite color, one of my favorite colors. And they would have been perfect at my white Saarinen dining table. And I was making plenty of money back then and thought, I should get these chairs. They'll go perfectly with the dining table. And the next thought was, okay, get the chairs, and how long will it be before there's something else that you really, really want? How long will it be before that tug in your chest comes back? That discomfort, that unease of wanting. And I realized in that moment that if I kept on in that direction, it would be an endless train of periodic pleasure and a lot of discomfort. And I never got the chairs. But what that taught me was that there was nothing, absolutely nothing outside myself that would ever give me lasting happiness. Not any new possession, not any new person in my life, not any new job. Nothing. Sooner or later, it would cease being the joyful thing it had started out as. I saw that very, very, very clearly. I saw also clearly that the only way to experience lasting happiness and peace in my life, no matter what the outside circumstances were, would be to go within. And that's why I was finally willing to sit down and start doing Zazen. But because of all the history that I had, a certain amount of it was not very happy at all. It was not that easy. And even if I had not been traumatized earlier in my life, it would have been difficult because we're rowing upstream for a long time against our habit patterns, against that tiny little thought in the background of our mind, well, okay, this is happy enough. Let's just coast for a while. And we can coast for a while, and then the discomfort, the unease, the dukkha returns. And so much of Zen practice for most people is a kind of a seesawing, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. Plunge forward with great motivation, fall back out of distraction, lack of interest, frustration, you name it. And then we realize that there is something important about doing practice, and so we surge forth again. And again, we get to a certain point and begin to lose interest, lose energy, and start sliding back again. Until, hopefully, one day we reach a point where something happens. We uncover some insight that makes us realize that sliding back is empty, meaningless. It will never bring us anything lasting, permanent, happy, joyful, beyond a certain brief moment. And then we are much more motivated to practice deeply. And when we finally gear up to practice deeply, there will be lots of snags still on the path. There will be lots of things beckoning to us. Oh, come here, do this. It's going to be so great. And yet, if we do follow that, there will be temporary pleasure, but nothing lasting. And all the while, we're going through life. All the while, we're getting older. Maybe we're getting sick. And we don't know how long the karma of this life will last. Still, how many times have I thought, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink? What we can realize through our practice is phenomenal, liberating beyond your wildest dreams. All you have to do is do it. But the doing it, particularly if we've got one eye cocked on a different direction, one foot outside the circle, just in case, it's going to take a very, very long time. I have a friend who misunderstood the directions of Mitra-roshi in terms of what to do with your breath. Back up a little bit and give you a little back history on this. The traditional Rinzai practice, until one begins to work on koans, and in fact, in addition to working on koans, when you do start working on koans, is the extended out breath. It's known as Susokan, and it goes like this. You breathe out normally, and then as you would ordinarily breathe back in, instead you breathe farther out. And the focus is on the experience, the physical experience of this in your body. Breathing out, extending the out breath, cuts to the chase. It allows things to drop by the wayside, temporarily at least, and focus can go very deep and broad at the same time, which seems like a contradiction, but go ahead and see. It's not. You become both expansively aware and deeply focused. And it's a quick way to reach a threshold that if you cross over it, you can plunge into a deeper and deeper and deeper mind state towards awakening. Kapla-roshi's first teacher was a Rinzai teacher, Nakagawa Soen-roshi, and he tried to teach Kapla-roshi the Susokan practice. Kapla-roshi was very impatient back then. He was much younger, in his early 40s, and he wanted to just get Kensho and run, was what he wanted. And so he got impatient with this practice. And finally, Soen-roshi said, well, then just follow your breath. Count them and then follow them. And so that's the teaching that we got at the Rochester Zen Center. A Dharma friend of mine, in their first sesshin, misunderstood the instructions and thought that they were supposed to extend the out-breath, and did so, and had an amazing Kensho in their first sesshin. And that person went on to practice deeply all the way through the koans, and then through more koans with another teacher, and is a fabulous teacher these days. So we already have a very fine tool that can prune away the attachments that prevent us from truly being happy, from truly being at peace, from truly living our compassionate life. But we have to persist. That's the hook. If we go so far, things start to feel better. They're pretty much guaranteed to feel better as we do extended practice. But then what can happen, unfortunately, as a side effect of that, is that our motivation can waver. We could be less inclined to do the practice. Tony Packer once said to me, I never met anyone except this one person who came to practice not out of pain. And she added, it only took him 6 months to uncover it. Most people do come to practice out of pain. The lucky ones, I think, come out of profound curiosity. Just like Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, when he was 9 years old. Show me one thing that says you're Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche. Show me one thing that tells me who you really are. Is it your clothes? Is it the house you live in? Is it your parents? Is it the cars you own? Is it the food you eat? Is it what you do for work? Is it your relationships? Is it your haircut? And the young boy searched and searched and searched and realized at a certain point that he had to turn inward, that was where he needed to search for who he really was. And that's where we need to search for who we really are if we're to get results. But that search has to be ongoing and persistent. Sure, it'll waver. But as soon as we find ourselves wavering, dig back in. Otherwise, we can go the rest of our life with one foot on the brake and one foot on the gas, and reach the moment of our death without having discovered the amazing freedom, beyond freedom, true liberation of understanding the true nature of reality. If anybody wants to read this, it's a great book so far. In Love with the World, A Monk's Journey Through the Bardos of Living and Dying by Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche. He had been raised in monasteries, and at this point he's in his mid-30s and has had for a long time a longing to do a traditional mendicant pilgrimage. But given his status, given his responsibilities, it was not an easy thing to manage. When he left the monastery, just as the Buddha had left home, and in this case, the monastery was his home, he had to make sure that everything was taken care of ahead of time so that his students would not be abandoned. He realized that his attendant was not well. His attendant had been with him for 10 years and realized as well that he would not see him again. And he suddenly came face to face in this process of leaving the monastery, sneaking out in the middle of the night, taking a train to Varanasi. And initially, still identified with his robes. He did not abandon his robes in terms of what he was wearing initially, because he was still so identified as being a monk. The first night, he rented a room in a cheap hotel rather than sleep on the floor in the train station. Does this sound familiar? Not the specifics of it, but the challenge in letting go of our identities. Don't we feel safe being who we think we are? And yet that safety can be impacted in any moment. And he did have a number of adventures, including coming so close to death that he had a near-death experience. Eventually, he returned to the monastery after some years when it was time to do so in his own mind and continue teaching. Who are we? If we're not the clothes, if we're not the haircut, if we're not the house, the location, the possessions, who are we? Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.